Ohayo gozaimasu from Japan. In this video, I'm going to give you my current experience teaching English in Japan and why I think you should teach English in Japan if you're interested. I'm also going to give you some important things to consider and to help you decide whether or not it's right for you. So without further ado, let's jump right in. So the reason why I wanted to make this video is that I've had an excellent experience teaching English in Japan so far. I've really enjoyed my time in Japan. And while there have been some rough patches here and there, and some depressing days mainly due to the cultural differences of not being able to speak Japanese fluently or pick up everything that's being said, I've still really enjoyed being here in Japan. There have also been a lot of videos made about why you shouldn't teach English in Japan or why living in Japan is a bad thing. But I think it's a really worthwhile experience, and I think you should consider it depending on your outlook in life and how you approach certain situations. I also want to first establish that I'm a very positive person in general, so that influences how I approach a lot of situations here in Japan. I also work very hard at my job and try and find new ways to improve myself or get involved in the school that I work at. This is a very important point, so I will come back to this later and keep it in mind. For now, let me set the stage for any expectations you might have about living in Japan and teaching English. First, don't expect to live in a very popular city like Tokyo, Osaka, or Kyoto. In fact, it's much more likely that you're going to live in a rural or very small town like Minabe or Nagahama. These towns are often very rural and isolated, so you may not be able to get around easily and you may not even have a car. So it might be very expensive or very hard to get around to places you want to go. And depending on your financial position, you may have to keep a very strict budget in order to still survive and actually do all the things you want to do. I have to set aside enough money and make sure to balance my expenses so that I can still do the things I want to do and go on the trips I have planned. Now, depending on your position, you may also have a lot more free time than other positions. So that really depends on where you're placed and which company or job you choose. So in general, be prepared to live in a very quiet place where there might not be a lot going on. I'm actually pretty fortunate that I live here in Wakayama City, where I can easily go to Yoshino, Osaka, or even Kyoto on a weekend trip. That may be the case for you, but plan for it not to be. In fact, depending on the position that you go after, you may have a say in where you want to go, or you may not. You may only be able to even choose a region such as Northern Japan, Central Japan, or Southern Japan. And then even that may fall through where they choose to assign you somewhere else. So be prepared to have expectations changed and plans also changed. In fact, once I arrived in Japan and got my assigned location, it was actually supposed to be Osaka, but got changed to Wakayama. So be flexible and appreciative of where you get placed regardless. Okay, with location out of the way, we can start talking about Japanese language and getting by with speaking only English. Don't worry, we will get to teaching English in Japan and why you should do it, but it's very important that I establish these expectations first because it's so important. So the big question is, do you need to know Japanese if you want to teach English in Japan? Well, technically no, you don't. You can get by and survive just by knowing English. But your life is going to be much more rewarding if at least you know some basic conversational Japanese. Maybe you can read some hiragana and some simple kanji. And also you can listen to and understand some key points in conversation. I think that'll go a long way in making your life here in Japan so much more rewarding. Also, your relationships with your teachers will improve, your confidence and general quality of life will be better, and you will feel closer to the culture. But regardless, you will still feel very isolated at times, so keep that in mind as well. I would say that a lower intermediate Japanese ability is a good spot to be in for people moving to Japan. But if you can reach that higher level first, then all the better. But you might be thinking, Derek, I've heard that Japan is very accommodating for English speakers. And while that may be true in some situations, or relatively speaking compared to other countries, you will quickly realize that it isn't exactly true for someone living in Japan, and especially for someone living in a rural part of Japan. You will quickly be overwhelmed with all the kanji that you can't read, listening to the Japanese train audio as you're trying to figure out when your next stop is supposed to be, or trying to cancel your national health insurance and not having any translations to help you along the way. So take my advice and try to reach that lower intermediate Japanese level first before you move to Japan. With that being said, depending on the company that you choose, you're likely going to have a very good support group of people who want to help you in those kinds of situations. So regardless, you're gonna still be able to get by even if you don't know any Japanese. Don't let that stop you from trying out living in Japan and teaching English. But I would still recommend that you learn some basic Japanese to get by and not be as reliant on those people for help. Okay, so now that we have covered those very important points, we can start talking about why you should teach English here in Japan. First of all, teaching English in Japan opens up so many opportunities to engage with the culture that you wouldn't get normally. I have learned so much from my short time of being in Japan about the Japanese school life and the small nuances that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise from external sources. I have participated in Sports Day, an international cultural exchange event, an outing with Japanese teachers, and many different club activities, such as playing basketball, leading activities for an English speaking club, and even singing Stand By Me for a band club. While it was pretty difficult at first getting situated and figuring out how to manage school activities with lesson planning and teaching lessons, I eventually found a nice rhythm where I can produce great lessons for the students while still having a ton of fun with social activities and getting to know them better. And the more engaged I am, the more enjoyment I get out of this job. Unsurprisingly, teaching English also exposes you to many different opportunities for learning Japanese. Not only will you be hearing a lot of different Japanese throughout the day, but you'll also be able to practice speaking Japanese with your fellow teachers, or practice reading and learning new kanji from the different varieties of school resources that are available to you. While it can be very stressful and nerve-wracking to have a conversation in Japanese with a native speaker, it's worth trying even if you make a lot of mistakes, because regardless, the Japanese teachers are going to be very grateful for you even trying it in the first place, and your work relations are going to improve with it. Working in a school setting informs you of cool places and unique areas to visit, food to try, and events that you can attend that you normally wouldn't hear about from your English sources. Many of my trips and travel plans have actually been influenced by talking with students and teachers about things they like and places they've been. In fact, one of the teachers actually gave me this guidebook to all the key attractions in Wakayama Prefecture, and it includes a whole list of all the small towns. And I've learned a lot about the cool places I can go and some really fun activities that I can do locally. The simple fact is that unless you can understand and you have a connection with a bunch of different Japanese social media, web pages, and so forth, you're probably not going to hear about a lot of big major events unless you actually happen to be upon the area that they happen in, or you actually speak with Japanese teachers and people locally that know about these events. And lastly, you should hopefully feel very rewarded in knowing that you're improving their understanding of different cultures and their ability to speak English. Many of the students excitedly say hello to me every morning and are legitimately happy to see me. And so that is one of the main aspects of why I think teaching English in Japan is such a good experience for other people. So that is why I think you should teach English in Japan, but we're not done yet. And I want to mention that you may still find yourself in a rough situation if you come to teach English in Japan. You sometimes just can't avoid it. Maybe it's a rough school or your position isn't really the greatest. So it's important to do your research beforehand and try and find a good company or position with a support network that can really help you when you need it. Now, I'm not going to disclose any information about the company that I work with, but you can definitely find some videos or forums talking about the different positions, major companies out there, and get a good idea for what's right for you. The important thing to remember is to make sure that your expectations aren't fantasized, and that you're willing to embrace not only the good points that you hear so much about Japan, but also the bad points that can ruin your experience if you let them. So hopefully I've given you a better understanding of what it's like teaching English here in Japan. So make sure that if you've enjoyed this video, you like, comment, and subscribe, as that'll help this channel grow and help me continue to make content for you guys. As always, I like to feature new resources and places you can go to help. that I find very useful. And this week I want to mention Hua Huanen's YouTube channel. He's a really great new YouTuber who is making content for finances in Japan and just life in general, and also being healthy in Japan. So make sure you check him out. He's really great at what he does. Also, I've already mentioned this before, but the Learn Japanese Pod Discord is a great resource and a great community that you can find to get support and learn the language. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to catch you in the next one.